And I again want to thank you for your tremendous public service. Shifting gears to corruption in Ukraine, in your powerful deposition, you described, quote, "We have long understood that strong anti-corruption efforts must form an essential part of our policy in Ukraine. And now there is a window of opportunity to do that. And so why is this important? And why is this important to us? Put simply, anti-corruption efforts serve Ukraine's interests, but they also serve ours as well." Is that still your testimony?
Yes.
And particularly at the critical time in 2014, after the Ukrainian elections, you testified that the Ukrainian people have made clear in that very election that they were done with corruption. Correct?
Yes.
And you also testified that the Ukrainians thought it would be a good idea to set up this architecture of a special investigative office that would be all about the crimes of corruption. Correct?
Yes.
And I know this was before you arrived in Ukraine, but you are aware that the first case that the US, UK, and Ukraine investigators worked on was in fact against the owner of Burisma.
Yes.
And that was during the Obama administration.
Yes.
And in your testimony, you said today, the investigation was never formally closed because, quote, "it's frankly useful to keep that company hanging on a hook," right? That's your quote.
Yeah, the Ukrainian investigation was never
Partnered with the US and the UK.
as I understand it. Yeah, although because we didn't see the Ukrainians moving forward on that, we no longer partner with them on that case or in that way.
But let's take a step back. The first time you personally became aware of Burisma was actually when you were being prepared by the Obama State Department for your Senate confirmation hearings. And this was in the form of practice questions and answers. This was your deposition. And you testified that in this particular practice Q&A with the Obama State Department, it wasn't just generally about Burisma and corruption, it was specifically about Hunter Biden and Burisma. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And the exact quote from your testimony, Ambassador, is, quote, "The way the question was phrased in this model Q&A was, what can you tell us about Hunter Biden's, being named to the board of Burisma?" So for the millions of Americans watching, President Obama's own State Department was so concerned about potential conflicts of interest from Hunter Biden's role at Burisma that they raised it themselves while prepping this wonderful ambassador nominee before her confirmation. And yet our Democratic colleagues and the chairman of this committee cry foul when we dare ask that same question that the Obama State Department was so concerned about. But we will continue asking it. And lastly, in my 20 seconds left, I just want to get it on record. In terms of defensive lethal aid, which you were an advocate for, that was not provided by President Obama. It was provided by President Trump.
That's correct.
I yield back 5 seconds.
For 3 years, we've heard these outrageous and frankly unbelievable accusations regarding Russian collusion. Accusations that we now know are absolute nonsense. There was no basis at all, despite promises from some members of this committee that they had secret proof that would prove this collusion, and again, we know that it was nonsense. But now in year 4, we apparently move on to Ukraine and quid pro quo, culminating yesterday when the Speaker announced that the President would indeed be impeached and removed for office for bribery. And with that statement, I would now feel compelled to ask you, Madam Ambassador, as you sit here before us, very simply and directly, do you have any information regarding the President of the United States accepting any bribes?
No.
Do you have any information regarding any criminal activity that the President of the United States has been involved with at all?
No.
Thank you.
And the public hearings in the impeachment inquiry will continue this upcoming week with 8 officials now scheduled to testify, including U.S. Ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland, whose name has come up often in these public hearings so far. Last week, the House panel heard testimony from Acting Ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor, and George Kent, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and Eastern Europe. Neither could answer this key question from Texas Congressman John Ratcliffe.
In this impeachment hearing today, where we impeach presidents for treason or bribery or other high crimes, where is the impeachable offense in that call? Are either of you here today to assert there was an impeachable offense in that call? Shout it out. Anyone?
And joining me right now is Congressman Ratcliffe. He joins me now in an exclusive interview. He sits on the House Intel, Judiciary, and Homeland Security Committees. He is also a former federal prosecutor. Congressman, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks for being here.
You bet, Maria. Good to be with you.
I want to look ahead, but first take a look back. What is your takeaway from what you heard this past week?
Well, let's summarize. We heard from 3 witnesses this week. None of those 3 witnesses have met or spoken with President Trump in the last year. None of them were on the July 25th call in question. None of them have firsthand information of that call, of course. And as you just played, none of them are aware of any criminal activity or impeachable offense. So if you only get one chance to make a first impression, I think the impression of the American people is, what is this about and why are we here? What is Congress wasting our time with on yet another effort to frame the president for something else he didn't do?
Some of these testimonies have been leaked. Some of them have been out in the public view, but others not. What is the process in terms of getting certain things out and others not?
Well, the process is whatever Adam Schiff decides the process will be that day. Think of it this way, Maria. If you're accused of a crime, you show up and the person who's accused you of the crime is in charge of the trial. He decides what witnesses are going to be called, the order that they're going to be called in, how much they'll be allowed to testify, who will be allowed to ask them questions. That's what Republicans are dealing with, and I think the American people see that. So, we find out every day what the rules are going to be. The rules change every day. The testimony changes. The crimes that the president allegedly is accused of change. Just in this past week, Maria, we went from this was all about a quid pro quo to this was about extortion to this is about bribery. So we don't know what the crimes are going to be.
Is an injustice, a sham, a despicable, disgusting, repulsive, shit show.
The other thing that was important that came out this week is, regardless of what they say about the crime and what it ultimately is, there's no victim for the crime. The alleged victim, the president of Ukraine, has said there was no pressure, there were no conditions, there were no demands, there was nothing improper. It was a good call. I was happy with the call. So, you've got no crime and you've got no victim. That's the worst impeachment trial ever.
Yeah, especially since the whistleblower first brought us these allegations and Nancy Pelosi and colleagues wanted to talk with the whistleblower. We've got a letter here that Nancy Pelosi wrote the speaker to her colleagues saying that the administration needs to stop blocking the whistleblower from disclosing to Congress a serious possible breach of constitutional duties by the president. And yet now, Adam Schiff says he does not want to speak to the whistleblower.
Right. So what we keep getting are parading through one ambassador or diplomat after another who doesn't know the president, hasn't spoken to the president, doesn't know what either president really thinks about what happened, and we're not hearing from the most important witnesses. The most important witnesses are the whistleblower who started this, Adam Schiff, who met with the whistleblower that got this started, and Hunter Biden, whose testimony became indispensable this week when we learned that it wasn't a sham, as Chairman Schiff said, to be asking questions about that. We found out that the Obama-Biden State Department was concerned about Hunter Biden's role on Burisma. We heard from Ambassador Yovanovitch and Mr. Kent, who both said they thought it presented a conflict of interest. When Republicans try and ask questions about that, we're gavelled down. So, again, this is headed summarily. The Democrats want to send this to the Senate without testimony from the most important witnesses.
Well, I think this is an interesting point that you bring up, because that did come out last week that, in fact, the Obama administration was prepping Ambassador Yovanovitch when she was going to be there in the testimony room. They needed her to understand the specifics on Hunter Biden on the Burisma board.
Think about that, Maria. What her testimony was, there are thousands of companies in Ukraine, and in preparation for her confirmation hearing, the Obama-Biden State Department briefed her on one company, Burisma, the company that was paying Joe Biden's son obscene amounts of money, a corrupt company that was paying him obscene amounts of money, a company who was being investigated, and the prosecutor who was investigating that was fired 6 hours after Joe Biden demanded that he be fired. So, the president has every right to take care that our laws are faithfully executed, and the Hunter Biden contract presents a prima facie case of corruption on its face, and it's totally appropriate for us to be looking at that relationship. We ought to have that testimony in an impeachment trial that relates to questions about investigation.
So the question becomes, where is this all going? I mean, in this upcoming week, you've got 8 more witnesses coming down to testify, and yet there is a strong belief out there that your colleagues on the left are sort of railroading this through, trying to get as much done as possible before Thanksgiving, and perhaps to beat the IG report that's coming out, which is looking at the origins of the Russia probe. That's going to be coming out soon as well. Let me get you to respond to what Lindsey Graham told me last weekend on this program in terms of any impeachment inquiry headed to the Senate. Watch this.
I think it's important to find out what really did happen regarding the firing of the prosecutor and what was the conflict of interest that Hunter Biden had. But back to the whistleblower, it's impossible to bring this case forward, in my view, fairly without us knowing who the whistleblower is and having a chance to cross-examine them about any biases that they may have. So if they don't call the whistleblower in the House, this thing is dead on arrival in the Senate.
Dead on arrival in the Senate. What does that mean, Congressman, in terms of this whole process?
Means this is a waste of time. I think the Democrats know that. Look, you have Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee, which is now the House Impeachment Committee, that already voted to impeach the president. They've made up their mind, and this is dead on arrival without fairly looking at the most important witnesses. They don't want the whistleblower to come in because it has now been discovered that Chairman Schiff's office coordinated for that person to become the whistleblower. The other thing that Chairman Schiff hasn't done, you talk about witnesses and transcripts, he hasn't released the Inspector General's transcript, the first transcript of the first witness, because it will tell you what the Inspector General knew and didn't know about the relationship between Chairman Schiff and the whistleblower based on what Chairman Schiff and the whistleblower did or didn't reveal to the Inspector General. So this is such an unfair process. I think everyone sees that Republicans are dealing with an inquiry where we have not just one but 2 hands tied behind our back. But despite that, the Democrats are still losing. In a case where we talk about impeaching a president, it should be clear, it should be egregious, and it should be bipartisan, and it's none of those things.
Yeah. You know what? Stay with us, Congressman, because I want to ask you about connecting the dots here to the origins of the Russia probe. Coming up, we understand from William Barr that the IG report is imminent. We're going to take a look at that, as well as talk about those transcripts that you'd like released, because I know you need to be able to bring that up in questioning this upcoming week. Congressman, before I get to the IG report, because I want to get your thoughts on what we're going to hear from this IG report, which is now, I guess, scheduled for early December. But one thing that I noticed this past week, are you guys not under oath in Congress, in that room? For example, Adam Schiff, you've said that you want Adam Schiff to come down and testify under oath. Does that mean that what we're hearing from Adam Schiff in these public hearings, he's not under oath, he can say whatever he wants?
Yeah, he's not sworn in as a witness as we preside over these hearings, or he presides over these hearings. Much of what he is saying to the American people is just not true, and I know it's not true. We know that it's not true. We'd like him to testify. I think Congressman Collins is going to ask for that when the House Intelligence Committee sends a report to the Judiciary Committee.
Right.
I doubt that Chairman Nadler is going to allow that. This,
Okay.
as you used the word, railroaded this through. I don't think they're going to allow that. They should. And I think that's just unfortunate, but it's another reason why this is going to be dead on arrival in the Senate. The most important witnesses, including Adam Schiff, are not going to be testifying.
I'm going to speak with Congressman Doug Collins in a few minutes, and I'm going to ask him about that. But it struck me because I guess that's why he could say, well, we haven't seen the whistleblower, we don't know who the whistleblower is, and then a couple of weeks later we find out, oh, well, actually, no, my staff did meet with the whistleblower. He doesn't get in trouble for that because he can say what he wants because he's not under oath. Just want to make that clear. The IG report, Congressman, when do you expect it? You know, you've been studying the origins of the Russia probe. You and your colleagues now for 3 years have done a great job in terms of exposing the wrongdoing that took place in 2016. What should we expect from this report?
Well, I do think it's going to be the first week of December. Bill Barr said it's imminent. I think, you know, I would love it if it came out sooner because to your earlier point, Maria, the Democrats are racing to get through this impeachment as quickly as possible. That's why we have 8 witnesses and 5 hearings this week, and we're not doing any of the work, is because they know that that Inspector General report is likely to be damning about the origins of the 2016 investigation into the Trump campaign, the role that the Obama-Biden administration officials played in that. Look, we know this. The report is supposedly 500 pages. It doesn't take an Inspector General 500 pages to say that everything was done correctly and properly. And I can't tell you everything that's in there, but what I can tell you is that I know that the Inspector General is going to have to find that there were things that were done wrong, that there was exculpatory information that wasn't provided to the FISA court. And I think it's going to be an indictment of Adam Schiff, who has written his own FISA rebuttal memo, if you remember, back in January of 2018, saying, how dare Republicans criticize people like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and Andy McCabe and Bruce Orr, who have done nothing wrong. I think that the IG report's going to find that there were problems in the FISA application process, and they don't want that to come out until after they impeach the president.
Wow. In fact, you've got a letter here from Adam Schiff to Devin Nunes, the ranking member on Intel, saying, look, we want all of these hearings specifically to be only about the Ukraine phone call. We don't want anything about Hunter Biden, and we don't want anything about any, he writes, quote, debunked interference into the 2016 election. Debunked. When I look at what's happening, you've got an investigation at the highest level of our law enforcement. That's the Attorney General investigating 2016 election and interference by protection of the FBI and the CIA. You've also got John Durham's investigation now, a criminal investigation. So I ask you, what exactly is debunked about 2016 interference, which is what Adam Schiff writes? I guess he's not under oath to write this letter either, right?
Same ship, different day. These people are sick.
He's not, in fact, and it's not debunked, and I think the IG report is going to validate Chairman, at the time, Chairman Nunes's FISA memo that highlighted the abuses. Look, I can tell you this. I can't tell you what the exculpatory information is that relates to George Papadopoulos, but there was some, and I can tell you that it was not timely delivered to the FISA court during the pendency of those FISA applications. And I'll promise you that the Inspector General report is going to address that. That's just one thing.
Well, we think we know that. Our audience, in fact, does know that because we have had George Papadopoulos on, and your colleague, former colleague Trey Gowdy, basically saying that there was an informant who went to George Papadopoulos and said, oh, it's great that Russia has these emails. It's good for Trump. And George Papadopoulos answers and says, no, it isn't. That's treason. I would never do something like that. And the guy was wired. It was an informant talking to him, and that transcript should be one of the pieces of evidence we're expecting in the IG report. That's what you're referring to, aren't you?
I believe that will be addressed by the Inspector General, and whether that was timely delivered to the FISA court. And assuming all of that is true, and we'll let the report speak for itself, then what you'll see is probably a shifting Democratic narrative saying, well, it didn't make any difference.
All right.
There are genuine questions about...
Sorry, go ahead. Finish your thought.
No, there are legitimate questions from those of us that have seen the classified documents about the origins of the 2016 investigation. It's, I think, unraveling, and that's why they're rushing to impeach the president. They failed to impeach him for being a Russian agent because it was a joke. They failed to impeach him for obstructing justice because it was a joke. And this impeachment hoax based on a phone call with a president of the Ukraine who says, I'm not a victim, nothing happened, is also a hoax.
So we're going to talk with Democrat coming up, Jeff Van Drew from New Jersey. He was one of two who voted against the impeachment inquiry. Real quick before you go, Congressman, do you expect this vote for impeachment in December? What are you expecting in terms of when the House votes to impeach President Trump?
Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff are racing to get this done. That's why we have 5 impeachment hearings this week with 8 different witnesses. They're racing the clock. They want to get this done before information that comes out that damages the Obama-Biden administration and their efforts to frame Donald Trump come out in the IG report or from John Durham's criminal investigation into those very same issues.
All right, we will be watching. Congressman, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks.
It's hard to think of an ideal more American than the freedom of speech. When people say our soldiers fight and die for our values, what they mean is our freedom to say what we think is true. That's our birthright. It's the most important thing we have, that we have ever had. And so for generations, there was bipartisan consensus about this. In fact, liberals were among the most stalwart defenders of the First Amendment, and good for them. But then the left took control of this country's institutions. Liberals became the establishment they had once opposed. And suddenly, free speech seemed like a challenge to the highly profitable existing order, the one they were getting so rich from. So our schools began to teach our children that freedom of speech is a threat. In fact, it's immoral. And over time, the kids started to believe it. Why wouldn't they? At this point, nearly 60% of young people believe we should change the First Amendment to ban speech they don't like. Now, changing amendments is hard. 2/3 of Congress would have to approve a change like that. But on campuses, many students aren't waiting for Congress to act. They've decided to impose censorship right now. Watch, for example, kids at the purportedly impressive Northwestern University try to ban Jeff Sessions from speaking out loud. Yeah, that's Northwestern. It's funny, if you're a middle-aged parent and you're at dinner parties with other middle-aged parents and they're talking about, bragging really, about what schools their kids get into, well, you got into, Cody got into Northwestern, it's really the Harvard of the Middle West. And you think, it's probably pretty impressive, right? No, that's actually what it looks like. It's not impressive at all. It's pathetic. Northwestern, by the way, is home to what they claim is a prestigious journalism school. And yet the student newspaper there apologized for daring to cover the Jeff Sessions event. The newspaper did. Quote, "Nothing is more important than ensuring that our fellow students feel safe," the editors later explained, as if reporting was somehow a threat to student safety.
I gotta come over and see the fake news. Let's go.
Meanwhile, over at Harvard, the Student Government Association on campus, which not incidentally is the single most overrated collection of people on planet Earth, passed a statement condemning the student newspaper on campus because, listen to this, it had dared to ask the Federal Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE, to comment on a story. They didn't endorse ICE. Someone just called up and said, hey, ICE, can we get a comment? Now, ICE didn't respond, didn't provide a comment, but it didn't matter. More than 650 students at Harvard signed a petition condemning the paper for contacting ICE. The Young Democrats at Harvard's campus issued a statement claiming the paper had, we're quoting now, deliberately chosen to put our students in jeopardy. One campus activist group is now urging a boycott of the newspaper because calling ICE was just that scary. It's pretty funny. On the other hand, it's really kind of ominous. Because our meritocracy is essentially fraudulent and our system is completely rigged for the benefit of a few, a lot of these shallow neurotic narcissists that we're making fun of tonight will in the end wind up running this country. Those people writhing on the floor about how they're so threatened, yeah, they're going to be in charge. They shouldn't be, but because the system is rigged, they will be. They'll be making the decisions that affect your life and the lives of your children and grandchildren. And these are the people who literally couldn't care less about the First Amendment, or any amendment, or in fact any document that might limit their power in any way. They consider themselves gods, and they'd like you to shut up and obey, and they'll use force if they have to. Shut up and stop asking questions, says the reporter. So what kind of place will America be when those people take over? Jason Neal has thought about this. He's a professor at DePaul University. He's the author of the fantastic book, We Have Overcome. And he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks so much
Thank you for
coming
having me.
on. So when you see tape like that, or maybe on your own campus, you've seen reactions like the ones on display this week at Northwestern and Harvard, what does it make you think about our future here?
Well, our late great president said that the philosophy of the classroom today will be the government of tomorrow, Abraham Lincoln. And it makes me think that we are going to see a kind of bloated totalitarian government, a socialist government. I want to say a few things. You know, what we're witnessing on these campuses is really something that is very nefarious. We're witnessing the criminalization of facts, of objectivity, of truth, of impartiality, and of fairness. And I have been saying on your show, and I know that you have endorsed this view, that our universities have become national security threats.
Yes.
Because they are the domains, they're the incubators in which the criminalization of truth and objectivity is taking place. And why are they national security threats? They're national security threats because they assault the Constitution, because they assault the unassailable principles that secure or inalienable rights. And this deference to the cult, this cult of deference to children, because these are children who do not want to have the courage of their convictions. They want to protest, but they want to be protected. And we live in a culture, Tucker, where I call it the cult of deference to children, where we defer to children, that we say you can take the boundaries by day, but you can protect the borders at night when your safety is, you feel your safety is protected.
These people are sick. So I wonder how you've described what's happening on campus, and I'll just repeat it again for those who missed it, as a national security threat, as an actual threat to this nation and its future. In the world I live in here in Washington, the debates are about, how many more H-1B visas we ought to issue, what marginal tax rates ought to be. It's just like it's not even happening. Why do you think the people in charge don't even acknowledge what's happening on campuses?
You mean the university administrators?
No, I mean the people in charge of our country in Washington, D.C. Neither party, you're pointing out that what happens, you're quoting Lincoln to say the attitudes on campus will be the dominant attitudes of our ruling class in this coming generation. So this really matters. And nobody in D.C. in either party seems even aware of what's happening. They don't seem to care.
I can speak just from a little bit of experience. I did some lobbying on Capitol Hill this summer. I had the privilege for a particular think tank, and I had the privilege of meeting both Democrat and Republican congressmen and their staffers, and I was shocked, Tucker, at the degree of ignorance that was displayed. These individuals in our government have no idea what's going on college campuses. When I told them, for example, what I had experienced on my own campus for defending Israel, they were shocked. And it's a sort of bifurcated world, the world of Congress and the world of our government, and this kind of Stalinist, totalitarian, oppressive system in our universities, these bastions of anti-free speech that is the norm in the educational system that is taking place. And the two worlds are not in communication or they're not.
No, and I can promise you that your average upper income parent sees college purely as a bestower of prestige. My kid goes to Williams or Middlebury. Isn't that impressive? and there's no sense of what's actually happening on the campuses, which is they're destroying our kids, and they're bankrupting the country.
I think, Tucker, too, I think that parents have a sort of naive trust in institutions.
That's for sure.
A lot of them are very concerned with the grades of their students, and in good faith have entrusted their children to the professoriate and the administrative bodies who run these universities.
Exactly.
And do not realize how what a corrupting influence the professoriate has exercised over their. So parents need to become more involved in their students' lives and their children's lives.
If I had $1 billion foundation, I would yank you out of that school and just send you on the road, to meet every potential parent of a college-age kid to tell them that, because I think that message more than any other needs to get out. Professor Hill, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
That there's a lot of people more concerned about being precisely, factually, and semantically correct than about being morally right.
These people are sick.